As that thing starts going. Okay, we're away. And we've got Nick Jolliffe here.
Bryan Pepperell.
And Bryan Pepperell, yeah, absolutely. And this afternoon we were talking to Gail Penny, and I said, hey, later on today, friend's going to come around. We're going to do the heavy lifting on the serious issues that the world is facing. And they are actually getting quite serious, aren't they, in some ways, Nick? I mean, a lot of earthquakes and a lot of suffering. We can't underplay with that. We wouldn't even want to make light of it.
No, not really. It's been quite an interesting year because reached April Fool's Day, so I did a bit of a review, and I think this year has been quite interesting for me from a disaster tourism viewpoint.
Yeah.
I was in Queensland for the floods.
Yes, you were.
And that was just in the start of the new year. I went back to Christchurch, and when I was down there was an earthquake. It was only a 5 point something, and we just sort of thought, oh yeah, it's a bit of a shock and a jolt. And I was back in Wellington, and the Middle East was going firecrackers, and people were burning themselves to death in Algeria, and things were getting a little bit heated there. And I got a call from my brother saying there's an earthquake in Christchurch. And I thought, well, I was there the other day. They had a shake then. I'd been down the year before. And things got really out of hand, and I was there the following morning helping to clear up. And I sort of reflected upon this, that the year hadn't really started very well from, say, a New Zealand perspective or a Middle East perspective, or perhaps a Queensland perspective. What I hadn't mentioned was that I've been keeping an eye on the floods which have been occurring through India and Pakistan in particular, which was a terrible event, and the fires in Russia, which affected the grain harvest. And I thought, well, global warming is one thing, but these earthquakes are, absolutely not linked, but just as bad. And I come back to Christchurch, a bit worried from Christchurch, and I'm looking around and watching a match on TV, and I do a bit of channel surfing, see a tsunami.
Yeah.
And it says live, and I thought, oh, I wonder when that was. So I flick a few more channels and see the same picture. And I must say, it's just been the most amazing sequence, and really, my heart goes out for everybody who's been on the spot. It's just appalling when you actually see it close up and personal. And we haven't seen anything quite like the Japanese experience with Christchurch, although I beg to differ. People died in Christchurch, and it was appalling. And the same happened in Queensland while I was there. Yeah. Even while you're there, you seem very detached from it, but you can see the devastation. So it's not been good.
Well, that was the thing which I found so amazing. It was almost all surreal because on just after New Year's Day, me and my partner went down to Christchurch, and there were a few buildings. We'll have to. We can't.
We'll start again.
No. It'll stop after, guys. Sorry, it'll stop after 5 rings. I promise.
Go away.
And it has. Amazing.
A miracle.
Yeah. And we were talking about this Christchurch earthquake, and it was so surreal because there were the buildings that had been damaged, and actually we were walking around them. The centre of the city had been cordoned off, and it was actually quite sort of weird because there would be 2 buildings basically the same age. One would be okay, and the other one would be a mess, Yeah. And then we came back up here, of course, and we thought, oh, well, and the earthquakes, the aftershocks kept going, of course. And it was very difficult, in particular for people in your parents' age who are still alive and living down there. Yeah. And then, of course, there was this final, and actually this is all set against a backdrop of an economic earthquake that had taken place.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a real worry. Christchurch really shocked me. I went to Littleton, and to get in on the day, I couldn't find my way through Christchurch. I ended up parking the car and walking over the hill. And as I came down into Littleton, past places where boulders had fallen and killed someone, and didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
And there were people removing bricks from chimneys, and I realised they weren't removing the top end of the chimneys. They were removing the bottom of the chimneys. The tops had come off in the previous earthquake, and they thought, oh, this is fine, this is tied to the house, it'll be fine. In actual fact, it wasn't. And so I came down the hill and looked at the main street. It was completely cordoned off. It's a complete mess. And you realise that the damage, you can always put damage right if you've got time and you've got materials, and more importantly in this climate, you've got the money. And I didn't think about the money at the time because I was busy, but when I got back up here, I scanned the financial pages of the New York Times, and I realised this oil thing's getting totally out of control simply because, one, we've reached peak, but more importantly, we've got disturbances in the Middle East. And Brent crude was going up, 110, 115, right up $119 and staying there. Supply and demand. The only reason there isn't a huge spike there at the moment is because we have a financial crisis in America in particular, and in Europe, where money is being printed. It's just printing money to keep things inflated. I mean, you look at what Bernanke's doing and all of these other guys, and they're actually printing fairy dust.
Amazing.
And it's amazing. And then I look at the devastation in Japan, and I look at what they have to do, and where are they going to actually get the money to do it, or how are they going to do it in the current economic climate. And I look at Christchurch, and I look at where New Zealand's at. And I'm absolutely horrified because the powers who be, in other words, the people who are running our economies, running our corporations, running our banking systems, more importantly, their political representatives, their handmaids. And I can't call them anything else than that because, in fact, they don't actually have a say. They're just the dog being wagged by a corporate tail and by a financial tail. And quite frankly, we can't rely upon them to lead us in any intelligent sense and to put back together things which we need to do to rebuild people's lives and their future and their expectation for a future in a place like Christchurch or even right across New Zealand.
Well, I noticed that the guy who wrote the Dog and Lemon book, the buyer's guide to getting a car, he has actually said that no one in New Zealand in the political hierarchy actually gets what's going on. And the sad part about it all is, God, way back in the late 60s, they had Hubbard in the US, and he warned them then. And of course, we got into the 70s, and there was a big push for an alternative. There isn't an alternative to oil, which is really the most difficult part about it. What people don't get their heads around, and of course, I guess we're all into this, is denial is actually the way we cope. So we're confronted with some really stark, reality. And what do? We react by just going into denial.
Yeah, and it's phenomenal, Brian, that you say that there's denial there because I read the papers and listen to the politics of it. And this week in New Zealand, if anyone's overseas watching this, we've got a right-wing government here, or supposedly right-wing. It's standard bloody robber baron financial backing. And we've got a Labour Party, and the pair of them sing from the same hymn sheet, which is very much a neoliberal sort of Friedman-esque economic policy thing. Now that's fine in a funny kind of way in a world where you can grow. But as we know, growth cannot carry on indefinitely.
No.
We've reached the peak of growth in a lot of areas. There may be some growth in other areas. There may be up and downs coming up. But the simple fact of the matter is that model of exponential growth is unsustainable. And when I have the Labour opposition in New Zealand here start harping on about the government hasn't done anything about growth, I just look at them and I say, you guys just don't get the picture, do you? You're really just not in any state to run anything. Well, it's very sad.
Our whole economic base actually is determined by the flow of energy. And the fact of the matter is, guys, that the energy has been cheap, and that's actually what's enabled us to expand and to actually reach the point where we've now overshot our carrying capacity as a planet. And I mean, it's actually really bad news coming, and we're on the downward slope of the peak, as Nick has been saying. And we're now starting to get a little glimpse of, look, forget about all the natural disasters. They've always taken place. And there's been dreadful things throughout history. You know, the plague, the Black Death, and good heavens, you know, after they'd finished mincing themselves up during the First World War, the theologians stood up on the Western Front and said God was dead. You know, it just seemed such an inhumane and dreadful process, where battle lines moved a few hundred metres back and forth, and millions of people died. The war stopped, not because, you know, there was a really definite outcome, and of course we do know that in fact Britain won the First World War, but more importantly, the big victory was the news started to get back from the front lines into the media and into the sort of popular culture, and it became too difficult for them to cope with. And so, in fact, really, that's actually what caused the...
They denied it.
Yeah.
They denied it, and they lost the peace. The fact of the matter is that in this country, we are, like the rest of the world, in a state of denial about the real state of things. We're in a state of denial about the fact that we have overly wealthy people in the world, and we have a massive, massive number of people who are not in the slightest bit able to cope with their existences. And we say this is right. We think, have this thing about the poor will always be with us. But it's absolute bollocks. The only way the rich got rich was because they took it off of everyone else. And I'm not saying that that isn't a piece of human nature and that won't continue. But I have a belief that the wealthy have a part to play. And their part to play is to actually disperse their wealth back to the rest of the community in a world which is in decline. It's strong communities that are really required, and they cannot stand aside, or they will stand aside in an ever-diminishing community, and in the end they'll be just them. And they'll be looking out at the barbarians across the gate, and those barbarians will be us.
Yeah, well, this non-compassionate use of accumulated wealth, which has been pointed to in the past, is actually a really big driver now right across Europe and throughout the Middle East, because there are huge numbers of young kids, young people, you know, up to 30 and 35, unemployed, and all the old guys, you know, have actually creamed it, and they're actually just shutting them out. Hey, look, I'll tell you what's happened, Nick. We're into 12 minutes, and we're into our 13 minutes.
We're pretty good.
And we're doing pretty well, but we're going to wrap this one up, because otherwise YouTube will wrap it up for us.
Well, there's one thing I would like to say, any young people out there watching it, which is that Bryan's actually just talked about how people in my generation have wrapped it up and taken the stuff away, but there's a new world to be built. And it's over you guys to build it. Don't build it in our image, for God's sake, because it's entirely wrong.
Yeah, we got it wrong big time. And I'll tell you, you know, actually, just think about this whole notion that we have overshot our carrying capacity. I mean, I had this half-wit from the local newspaper ring me up and say, oh, but there's going to be more people in Wellington and we have to do this, this and this. And I said, look, I would really question the assumption of the expansion you're talking about, because there's going to be no base for it. So, you know, what's actually going to be, we only got the population expansion, guys, because the energy was giveaway prize, and it's gone. Okay, so we're going to call it a wrap?
We'll call it a wrap with a final comment, Bryan.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of a single millionaire who was around at the time of Samuel Coleridge, and I was reading some of his poems today, and he was a fool. That's fine.